chairing this afternoon's meeting. I'll tell you a little bit about the Design Society in a minute. For those who may not be familiar with it, I'm sure most of you are. But a little bit of background to this. The Design Society holds every year a meeting at which the Board of Management of the Society and the Advisory Board and those involved with running of the special interest groups of the Society get together in what we call the rigging meeting, and so called because many years ago the community used to meet each year on Mount Rigi in Switzerland. This year, 2020, was the 20th anniversary, as you see from the slide in front of you, the 20th anniversary of the founding of the Society on Mount Rigi. And we had planned to hold the 20th anniversary meeting on the mountain in March. And it became one of the casualties of the coronavirus restrictions, which were gradually being introduced at that time. The Board of Management had to make a decision. Was it sensible to go ahead? I think very wisely they chose not to. And very quickly they managed to arrange for the meeting to be held virtually using the Teams software that we're using today. In the discussion after that meeting, we thought that it had gone so well, the discussions at that rigging meeting, the virtual discussions had gone so well that we might see whether we could use the facilities that we'd used then to encourage, while people were restricted in the travel and other arrangements that they'd done, to have a little bit more informal discussion on subjects which might be of interest to the design research community. And I'm very pleased to say that I see we've got 21 attendees plus the 4 of us here presenting, but we've got 25 of us here this afternoon have got together for the first of those meetings. So the first thing, thank you very much indeed, all of you, for coming along. And thank you to Ross and the Design Society admin for the technical arrangements this afternoon. And Ross is going to be managing our interaction with Microsoft Teams. This afternoon, we've got 2 presenters, Laura Hay from the University of Strathclyde and Phil Cash from the Technical University of Denmark, are going to be presenting a very short presentation in a moment, which is going to be a stimulus for discussion. Once that's over, we'll open it up to all of you, but a couple of sort of rules for how we do that. First of all, I see that all of you have your microphones muted. Please, will you continue to have them muted if you're not speaking? If you do want to make a contribution to the discussion, in the center of the lower part of your screen, there is a bar with the controls for Teams, and one of those items on the bar is raise your hand. And essentially, if you click on that, it will show that there is a hand raised, and the way that you appear in the bar, which I can see at the bottom of the screen, will change. I will try to manage the discussions such that I invite people to contribute, I hope, broadly in the order in which they raise their hands. I suspect if there's a lot of hands going up, I won't manage that very well, and I hope you'll be patient with that. But that's how we plan to work. Just before I hand over to Laura and Phil, though, Ross has prepared a small number of slides to tell us a little bit about the society, and I'll just very quickly go through those, if I may. So, first of all, as I say, Design Society, an academic community, and it's been going 20 years, currently has getting on for 1,000 members. From 48 countries, so a truly international community. Established on Mount Rigi, and it's as I say, interdisciplinary community. Academics mainly, but with industrial practitioners. And we want to develop and promote robust, usable and scalable means of designing solutions to complex problems. It's a sustainable and globalized society. Next slide, please. And the central core of the Society's activities, and the central part of today's meeting, is the development of design science, of a robust intellectual understanding of design through design research, through design teaching, through design practice as a means of getting innovative solutions, but also to help engage people from around the world in articulating their needs and challenges. We hope through that to understand innovative practice in industry, innovative practice in design, and develop further innovative means to support designers. Next slide, please. How do we do that? The central activity of the Society is running a number of international conferences. The International Conference on Engineering Design is our flagship. We liaise very strongly with the organizers of the design conference held in Zagreb, in Croatia every 2 years, but there are also many other conferences and meetings that we get involved with. Summer schools, this picture, the background here is from a summer school in engineering design research. Other events, and in particular, and this is what I would commend to you if you don't know the Society so well, the Society has a large number, next slide please, of special interest groups in all manner of topics concerned with design research and practice. The website of the Design Society, and we'll tell you a little bit more about that at the end of this afternoon. The website of the Society gives you links to all of these activities, to all of these SIGs, and to the many thousands of publications which have come out of our conference activities over the years. I hope that if you're new to the Society, you'll be interested in what you see here this afternoon, and you'll be interested in learning more in future. That's all I'm going to say for the moment, and hand over, if I may, now to Laura, who's going to tell us a little bit about the central topic of this afternoon's meeting.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. So as you know, the topic of today's discussion is going to be methodology for research in design and theory building. So me and Phil are going to kick things off with just a very short set of 3 slides. Hopefully, I'll try not to talk for too long. And then we will get into some discussion. So these slides are going to highlight some key issues, topics, challenges that we think are quite important in this area, but obviously you guys will probably have lots of other things you want to bring to the table as well. So it's just a starting point for us. So I guess a good place to start with this topic is to just have a think about the foundations of our field. So design research is a hugely diverse area. To illustrate that, I've nicked this nice little diagram from a paper by Imre Horvath, where he looked at the foundations of engineering design research. And as you can see, we really sit at the confluence of lots and lots of different fields. We import and borrow models and theories and methods and approaches from lots of different areas of study. And as a result of that diversity, I think design research is fairly unique in the sense that it encompasses lots of different philosophical traditions and different approaches that are founded on different assumptions about what constitutes knowledge, how we build knowledge, what's the nature of reality, and so on. And associated with all of those different kind of traditions or different methods. And we use methods from loads of different places, the social sciences, cognitive science, physical sciences, and many more. And there have been efforts to develop more integrated methodologies for design research as well. So a good example is the DRM by Blessing and Chakrabarty. And of course, there's been lots of work on design theory building as well already. So we have a special interest group in the Design Society that's dedicated to that. So I think it's important to highlight that these challenges and issues that we're raising today, some of them are new, some of them are not new, some of them are just really big questions that most fields, most scientific fields will need to contend with at various points in their evolution. So I think having events like this and discussions like this is a good way to open it up to more perspectives. So I'll hand over to Phil for the next slide.
Thanks very much. Can I have the next slide, please? Cool. So taking an overview of some of the current challenges that we can see in the design literature, we really, as a field, can face not just internal challenges, but challenges to our field as a discipline, mainly because more and more fields start to do design type of research, deal with design topics. and cover types of areas that we would consider core design research, but with actually very little connection to the design research literature. So that started a question of, why don't they cite us? How do they think about design research, and how do they think differently about it? And are there things in our field that we can look at that might reveal why this is the case? And one of those perspectives is basically like, how do we build knowledge, and how accessible is that knowledge for other disciplines and for people within our own discipline? So when you take that perspective, you can start to see a number of challenges in the current design literature. So in general, there's a lot of descriptive research in design, and we have a very, very rich tradition of describing the design phenomena, but there is not such a rich tradition of theorizing, abstracting that knowledge into constructs that can be connected into other disciplines, and connecting this to other bodies of theory from psychology and from management and from social science and education and so on. So there's a challenge in the way in which we build knowledge and how we communicate that through theory. Similarly, if you start to look at the methods and methodological consistency, there's very few meta-analyses, and even those that have tried to do meta-analyses have typically concluded that it's almost impossible to do meta-analytic research of the design corpus right now, simply because of the way in which we implement studies and the varying traditions that we bring to the table. And thus is very hard for us to build a coherent set of knowledge. Similarly, you see a very diverse body of methods, and it's very difficult then to talk about what is rigorous, what is high quality, what are good standards, how can we compare our standards to other areas of implementation, and what does it mean when we do a case study versus a management team does a case study versus a psychology case study, and so on. And it means that there's kind of a breakdown in communication between the knowledge build-up in design research and the knowledge being developed in other fields. So we really, as a field, run a danger of not being heard, and the really cool research that we're doing not making it out there. But at the same time, we face this awesome opportunity of, if we can identify these issues and develop a, let's say, a more robust tradition of theorizing and knowledge development, we also have a great opportunity to speak to a much wider audience. And I think that's really what we want to focus on, is like, what can we do going forward to reach a bigger community that's starting to recognize the value of design and design research, hopefully. So I will hand back to Laura for these challenges. Animations, I'm sorry.
Okay, thanks, Bill. So yeah, just a final slide, I guess, kind of summarizing some of the things that Phil just touched on there, and looking at future directions as we go forward and maybe try to address some of these issues. I'm not going to sit and read them all out, and I think we can maybe leave this slide up while we have the discussion, but I think they fall into 3 key areas. So how we actually go about building knowledge, building theory, and how can we do that in a kind of robust scientific way while maintaining the diversity that we have, and the strengths that that brings. Methodologically, how do we, for example, take methods from other fields and adapt them so that they're feasible for application in design research, while maintaining rigor and making sure we use them properly? And there's some other more general methodological issues that I think have been around for a while, but need to be addressed. And then lastly, as Phil was saying there, this all kind of feeds into the identity of our field. How do we make sure that we keep this unique kind of diverse identity that we have, but make sure that our research has impact beyond just our community? How do we make sure that we're interacting with other fields? And how do we kind of maintain our credibility as a scientific field, while maintaining this diversity that we've mentioned a few times? So that's everything I think me and Phil wanted to say to start off with, and we'll leave that slide up. And I don't know if anyone wants to jump in with any burning points immediately, or we can have a discussion between me and Phil and see how it.
Thank you very much indeed, Phil and Laura. That's very helpful. Just, I think I forgot to say at the beginning, but I should say now, we are recording this afternoon's session. So if you have any issues with that, then please either leave if you don't wish to continue, or if you have any issues with being recorded, then I suggest you don't contribute to the discussion. But the recording will be available after this event through the Design Society web site to members of the Society. There will be a link to the recording if you want to follow up any of the discussions. Now, I'm watching here for a hand to go up for someone who wants to make the first contribution to discussion, and there isn't one yet. Just while you're thinking about the points, yes. Now, Mr. QUYNH, Kunagun.
Hi.
Hi. Well, Ms. Doctor, sorry, I apologize.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Good start.
I really have to find with my IT team why they're showing a different name. So yeah, it's an easier name for that. It's my name is Mimi, and I'm from Imperial College London and good. RCA. I was really excited for this talk because I was joking with my colleagues that when I found the paper, when Philip is mentioning statistically how little we are being cited in management journals, then that was a moment when I was really, really excited, because I came actually from the business background, and there is a big potential in terms of McKinsey is growing massively, the Department of McKinsey Design, and they're developing reports about McKinsey Design Index, how important it is to implement and incorporate design methodologies in the business practices. And they're measuring that in terms of higher revenue for stakeholders and stuff. So from the, let's say, industry, there is a big call for looking into the design and having bigger influence of design over business. But then on the other hand, when I'm talking with other colleagues from design engineering research, then some people are saying, but we don't need to be cited in the management journal. Why do we care? We just care about our journals. And that's what I think is the aim, is that sometimes when we are creating our papers, we don't really aim to be published in AMJ, for example. There's one paper which I really, really like. It's Ileana Stigliani. She's from Imperial Business School, where she's studying design. In a design context, she's studying for a year a design consultancy, and they basically how they collaborate, building shared understanding. She calls it sense making, and it's actually being rated as one of the best papers in history of AMJ. But when you look into the paper, how she's building the research, it's very different than how I see research in the design research, so studies in the design research. So she's following a very classical methodology of qualitative research study when she's doing very big study of, I think it was 60 interviews, whereas many papers in design studies have 10 interviews, 6 interviews. She's having 60. On top of that, she's adding triangulation. That's one of the key things in qualitative research when you're adding data from other sources as well. And many times I'm reading papers from design studies, and it just have interviews, just have case studies, but there's no mentioning about GEOA methodology, Eisenhardt even, or just simple triangulation to verify our data and checking the credibility of that. So I think also from my point of view, I'm struggling with finding foundation papers in design research that I would just almost blindly follow, let's say. So I think in the management, they have this Eisenhardt, Joya, they go back to Malinowski from anthropology, and they have like, okay, this is the method we're following. But in the design, it's very open because we are trying to be innovative and open to ideas. But the rigor that you guys were mentioning before, I think that's something that I would be very happy to learn about or to see if we can develop that in the future, that rigor.
Yeah, that's a pretty good, nice summary because it's basically.
Sorry for that.
No, well, no, it's also. I think it's a perspective that Laura and I have been discussing a lot. Actually, is most other fields have kind of benchmark papers for different methodologies where, okay, they're not set in stone, but they at least give you a perspective of what did I do versus what were the guidelines, and if I did deviate, why did I deviate, and can I justify that, and actually a really active reflection on methodology. And it's notable that in no design research journal currently is there a forum for this kind of discussion and reflection on methodology. And it's actually something that Laura and I and a few others, in fact, are working on to introduce to the journals in design research, is actually a genre of paper for research reflections, so that we can start this discussion in a bit more of a in one place under one kind of forum, and really bring some voices together on what is good quality design research, and actually, should we just use Eisenhardt, or should we actually have our own criteria for what makes sense? And how do we keep that conversation up to date? Because obviously Eisenhardt has been updated multiple times.
Yeah, so. But exactly. Even in the management, people would say, oh yeah, but Eisenhardt was in the 80s. There are new versions of that, and of course the environments of the research is changing. For example, we're moving to online, so the data now we're trying to. It's called now in marketing ethnography, not ethnography anymore, because they're screening the online data. But yeah, like even if it's the recent research, then if there will be any guidelines and a common appraisal from the whole society, from other researchers, that okay, this would be, for example, I don't know, like if we could rate best papers, and just a simple thing.
That's been, I'll just butt in here and just say the topic of rating best papers has been a subject of a lot of discussion in the society, particularly at these rigging meetings, which I mentioned at the beginning. I see there's another hand up. What I forgot to say as well, when you do start, would you just say where you're from, please? Could I invite Daniela to make her point?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. My name is Daniela Gosu. I'm from the Technical University of Denmark. And I guess that effect that we can see in design research is that we tend to develop too many methods and tools that have very little uptake from industry. And I've been thinking quite a lot on that actually over the last years to try to understand what are the main root causes for that. And I have three main proposals here that I maybe would like to discuss with you, and maybe we can try to find other root causes for that. I've just added them into the chat. So the first one is there is a lack of a robust methodology for theory building and theory testing in design, science, and research. Number two could be the research in design science tends to start from scratch every time we start a new PhD project instead of building upon previous knowledge. Number three is research in design does not address real needs from industry, or there's a lack of a user-oriented approach when defining the research gaps. And I wonder whether you have similar perceptions on that, or whether you can see even other root causes for the lack of uptake by industry.
I think number two I particularly identify with. So, I mean, my background is I do research in neuroimaging of designers and applying psychology methods to study designers. So neuroimaging is an example of a relatively new method in design research. But I keep seeing examples of studies where it seems like we're trying to kind of reinvent the wheel and act like, building this from the bottom up instead of taking work that's already been done in the broader field of cognitive neuroscience and build on it a bit more. And I think there's a big question about how we take methods and theories and models from other fields and adapt them for design research, because sometimes you might have a method like I use fMRI, and it's not easy to apply that to study design. There are lots of characteristics of design that make it very difficult to use a method like fMRI, so there has to be some kind of adaptation. but I don't think we should just be starting from scratch. We need to build on what already exists. And I see lots of studies that, like you're saying, every PhD seems to start from scratch. And we have lots of studies that do lots of kind of exploration of things, and then they just kind of come to a stop and it never goes to the next level. So we have lots of people who seem to be starting from the beginning again over and over, but we never kind of get past that onto the next level. So I certainly agree with that point. And I think point one as well, I completely agree with. And I think it's a difficult challenge to address in such a diverse field. What does it mean to have a robust methodology for theory building? Because theory building can mean very different things from different perspectives. So yeah, I think you have some very good points.
Yeah, I mean, certainly point one sort of aligns with the results of the study that I published a little while ago, where I think like 2/3 of the published papers in design research are descriptive, where essentially they're reporting, they're offering a rich description of a phenomena, but not abstracting that into things that can be either tested or taken forward by other researchers in a formal way. And that means that there's kind of this stagnation in the literature where we don't get into the higher levels of theory construction. So that definitely aligns with what we know from the literature. I think I would add maybe a root cause in that, like, I think a lot of us have this perception that stuff isn't taken up by industry, but there's a chronic lack of data. So it would be good actually to do some meta-analytical studies of what is making it into industry and what are its characteristics. There's some really interesting studies in intervention science and in some of the health disciplines where they've looked at what actually makes an impact on medical practice and how long does it last in people's consciousness before they update their views. And there's like very specific criteria of medical methods that make them attractive to practitioners or not. And there's simply no data on such a thing in design research. So I think it's a little bit, we're shooting blind. So probably there's a lot to answer here.
Can I just make a couple of points? In the United Kingdom, we have what's called research excellence framework, that every few years the research outputs of every academic body in the country are assessed, and obviously it looks at things like publications, but what's come on much more strongly recently is impact studies. And I think there is a big collection of thousands of impact studies from research that's been done all over the country on all sorts of different topics. It would be interesting to look at if any of those impact studies have a design background and what how that's done. I think certainly when I was at Bath, there were impact studies there which we were submitting, which came from our work with industry.
Yeah, and I think that would be really nice to understand how they measure impact of research.
Yeah, exactly.
Another important issue here is that maybe the funding bodies, they don't want to fund research that is not innovative. And by not being innovative, it means that they might not want us to start from an existing methodology or two, because they will not be able to see the contribution there from a scientific point of view. So maybe at the point that we start measuring impact by industry uptake and actually value creation, these might change.
Yeah. Now there's no hands up, so that means I'm forced to say something. I used to, when I was more involved with the society years ago, I used to very often show as one of the slides the figure 1.1 from Powell and Bites, which shows design as the central activity, engineering design, in the center of a cross, the horizontal bar of the cross going from science through engineering science, engineering design, engineering technology to production, and the vertical bar going from politics through sociology, psychology, economics, engineering design, industrial design, architecture, and art. And saying that one of the things there was that we were in effect facing multiple communities, and the discussion Phil and Laura has had in particular has been talking about management, but I've come from a department, which is a mechanical engineering department, where my colleagues were all very much classically in the engineering science fields, and they had the appropriate standards and so on of reporting of research in the engineering sciences. So I think one of the challenges we have is that in the community we face these multiple different ways: face industrial design, face economics and management. There's a big developing activity in the manufacturing, production, engineering, technology area, and there's a long traditional activity. I mean, the American Society of Mechanical Engineers, the design theory and methodology, came out of a sort of split from the mechanical engineering design automation traditions. Oh yeah, well done, exactly. Parliament bites, and so that there's at least sort of half a dozen different methodological and other traditions there. Anybody else, please?
There's some good points from Joe in the chat. I don't know who Joe is, but they have a good point about is there a conflict between efforts for design to maintain its identity and the assumption that there should be a scientific model? If Joe is able, would you want to explain that a little bit more? Otherwise, we could just discuss it, because I think it's a good point.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, good.
Okay, I think that there are some underpinning assumptions that everything needs to conform to a scientific model of knowledge. There are different branches to the tree of knowledge: arts, humanities, science. Sciences are just one branch, and they all have their own traditions and ways of building knowledge and sharing knowledge. There's an assumption that design should conform to the scientific model, when in fact it is a practice-driven, for a large part of it, a practice-driven discipline in terms of its knowledge creation. And I wonder whether a question before, how can design find a scientific model, is should design find a scientific model, or rather should it find its own model that can integrate with the scientific model? We don't want to create a model that is obviously not something that scientists can understand, but we don't just want to integrate with scientists. Design practice integrates with scientists, it integrates with arts, with humanities, with all, as your first slide shows, we cross all sorts of different disciplines. So having a model that just conforms to the scientific understanding of knowledge might actually become a barrier to us integrating with other disciplines and their ways of building and talking about knowledge. I think we need to perhaps, design is a transdisciplinary thing. It has to integrate with lots of different disciplines. And so our model of building knowledge should be able to talk to all those other disciplines, not just science. And I think that's a really fundamental assumption in the way that question, for me, that question is framed around how can design find the scientific model. I would query that it needs to find a scientific model.
I think that's a fantastic point. It's something that I've spent a long time thinking about myself. So when I did my PhD, I guess I didn't really have much interaction with other people outside of design research. And I just assumed that all fields did research in this manner. And then I ended up in my postdoc working with a scientist, and they found some of the things that we do in design research to be completely abhorrent. Like, they couldn't believe some of the things that we do because it doesn't fit with what they view as scientific and the scientific method, and this is how research is done. And I guess during my postdoc, I ended up swinging completely in the opposite direction and thinking, you know, design research is way too subjective. We need to be more objective. We need to get rid of protocol analysis and all of these things, and do everything quantitatively, and that's how we fix the problem. And then I realized that, you know, design research is, as I said, super diverse, we study things like the subjective experience of humans. That's a key part to design research. You can't just get rid of all of the subjectivity and everything like that. It needs to be, you need to apply lots of different methods and apply those methods for the right thing. So I guess I've kind of been questioning recently what I actually mean by scientific in the context of design, because I think you're completely right. We don't necessarily want to just take the model of kind of positivist scientific method and just apply that and say that that's how design needs to be done. So I think that's a great discussion that we need to have as a field about, maybe scientific is the wrong word. I think I'm just thinking about how we do things more, how we use the right methods to do the right things and do it in a kind of rigorous and robust manner. I don't necessarily think that we should be taking a model of science from like the physical sciences and applying that in design. But I think it's a really good question.
Yeah, I would also, I mean, I come with a perspective due to my background and my interest and my interaction. Like I interact a lot with management research, and therefore I kind of see the parallels between design and management. But I think you can't map everything that's done in design research into that model. That would be a travesty, really, for a research field. However, I do think there's a significant chunk of our field that conforms to traditional, like doing traditional case studies and offering traditional case study type of insights, and doing experiments and offering experimental insights. And I think if you're engaging with that tradition as a design researcher, you should be aware of what the scientific model is that you're engaging with and offer insights in a way that's meaningful for that. And I think that's part of the reason why we don't have such a strong bridge to the management community, is that methodological issues aside, the way in which we do case study and experimental research on teams just isn't communicated in a way that's understandable to them. And maybe there's multiple traditions that we need to recognize and understand, but I think if you're doing something that's clearly in one tradition, you should do it well. And right now we haven't quite got that dialogue right, I think.
Thank you, Phil. Now, I noticed from the discussion that some people are saying they haven't got the ability to raise a hand in their version of Teams. If you want to speak and you don't have that ability to raise your hand, if you turn your mic on, I will spot that as well, I hope, and I could invite you to speak that way.
I think the next person is Yaroslav. Sorry about pronouncing your name.
Yeah, you pronounced it very well. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
So thank you very much. And
ahead.
Thank you for this very important and interesting discussion. My name is Yaroslav and I'm from Skoltech, and I'm completing my PhD under the supervision of Professor Ed Crowley. So, and in my research, I was pretty much working on the systems architecture and systems engineering. And some of the things that you've mentioned are very kind of, we have the same challenges as the design research. For example, system architecture is always or almost always considered as the subjective field as well, because you have case studies, and sometimes it's hard to prove that it can be applied to another kind of case. The methods and tools that you develop, you have to prove that they are kind of applicable to other areas as well. So in this sense, I see some interconnections between the design science and systems architecture. And following what Professor McMahon said, I would say that this mechanical engineering and systems engineering, they're kind of almost the same fields. And how would you position the design science and the research in these fields in regards to systems engineering? Because I would say that even in systems engineering, we have many socio-technical systems, and the methods trying to bring these socio-technical systems and to engage people into these problems, because many people believe that, well, we have this, if we do not take into account people, we are limited with the ability to predict the uncertainty and to manage the complexity. So thank you.
Thank you, Yaroslav. Phil or Laura, do you want to say anything there? I'll just make a point. I was reading a book on the history of technology, and I thought made an interesting point. In the middle of the last century, different domains, different academic groups were sort of seeing how they could contribute to the engineering technical issues that were developing strongly then. And what came out of mathematics was operations research. What came out of management was project management. What came out of engineering was systems engineering. So these different academic traditions lead to different domains emerging from trying to address what's different aspects of similar problem areas.
I mean, I think there's a big overlap between design research and systems engineering, but it's clearly the more technical and large scale side of things. Like a lot of the small team and process stuff just isn't covered in that context. So I think there's a significant diversity to design research that's not really captured by the engineering systems lens. It's not really my area of expertise, I've got to be honest.
Me neither, so I don't really have much more to add. I'm sorry. I mean, my PhD was very much, it was a design PhD, but I focused on technical systems. So I guess I kind of grazed the systems engineering side of things. And yeah, I mean, I guess the whole kind of absence of the human focus is a big issue in that area, but I don't know enough about it to give you a full answer to your question, I don't think.
I think there's definitely opportunities actually for that kind of like for there to be a blending between some of the more like managerial perspectives and some of the more engineering perspectives that bridge across design research. So I think there's probably opportunities for design researchers to do some cool stuff actually into these different communities by combining technical, what we know from technical engineering kind of research groups and more managerial research groups. And probably we're uniquely positioned to blend stuff in design research.
Yeah, that's true.
I absolutely agree. I think there is a hidden potential and for the collaboration, because system architecture, systems engineering could bring the kind of formal methods, right? But as I've mentioned, some of these disciplines like systems architecture, it also has this kind of same challenges as the design research. So there is clearly like the overlapping disciplines that can be taken into account, and we can look at them from different perspectives. But in the circle of this overlapping, we will have like the best of every discipline, I would say. So thank you for your answers.
Hopefully the best of everything.
Yes. Hopefully, yes.
Thank you very much, Yaroslav. There was a point made earlier about whether we might have more emphasis on best papers in our community. One of the other things that's been done over the last 20 years within particularly the RIGI meetings is discussions about whether we could have a collection of must-read articles or most important books in the area and so on. What we found when we tried to do that is that this diversity we've been talking about all afternoon shows up as well, that it's very that everyone comes along with different ideas of papers and books, and there are a small number appear a lot. But for those who are commenting, I'd be very interested if there were classic papers or pieces of work that you think are particularly good examples of work done in the community. One that comes to mind to me is the work that Petra Badkashov and Frankenberger were doing about 20 years ago, and all the stuff they did on critical situations. I think methodologically that was very strong. I think that's the sort of thing that as a community we can be very proud of, and we should be sharing. Another person who I think everything I see that he writes is done particularly meticulously is Nathan Crilly at Cambridge, and I would commend anyone wanting to learn about good design research practice to look at things that he writes.
Yeah, Nathan's impressive. Very impressive. Design Society admin, you have your hand up.
Oh, yes.
That is me. Hi,
Yes.
it's Ross here.
Yeah. Hello, Ross.
It's just to say that we've got about 15 minutes left, and also I have a sort of question or a proposal for both Phil and Laura. So I was reading Phil's paper, We're Next for Design Research, and as I was getting towards the end, I was starting to get a sense of, is it just that we're kind of stuck in our ways in terms of design research? When something big comes along like Industry 4, we try to apply what we already know to a new problem rather than coming about new ways of tackling the challenge.
Ooh. Tricksy question.
Controversial question.
Because I would say we're overflowing with somehow both new and not new. Like, I think I'm going to leave Laura to talk about the new methods, maybe. Because I can hear her in the background slowly thinking about that. But I think from my point of view, what hasn't changed is how we think about the knowledge we're generating. And that's a little bit what I tried to bring out in that article, probably not very well in reflection. But essentially, I think we started very much as a field where a lot of people were practitioners and they had very rich insight, and they brought that in the style of the research that they did, and it was really great for developing our initial understanding of all these phenomena. And as new phenomena have emerged, we've typically also brought this approach to really developing a rich understanding, working with the practice of these things. But we seem to have stalled in that approach to thinking about the phenomena that we study, and instead of part of our community building, a more rarefied view of like, okay, how can we abstract this? How can we test this? How can we generalize this to other phenomena? We have, as a field, focused very much on description, which is very difficult to communicate to others, simply because you have to say, look, if you want to know about this topic in design research, you need to read these 70 papers, and there's not really much I can do to synthesize them. So I think there's been a deep conservatism in the way that we've thought about generating knowledge. I think we use quite a lot of new methods over time. Do you want to comment on the methods, Laura?
Yeah, I mean, I think I kind of like see it both ways. I mean, in some areas, I'm just talking from my personal experience here. Again, my background is in cognition. There are in some ways, we are very stuck in our ways, and that we've been applying the same methods for a really long time without really evolving them that much. That might be a controversial opinion that I'm sure someone will disagree with strongly. But then we do also take new methods on and apply them, but I think sometimes we don't do it very well. So we kind of touched on this earlier when I was talking to Daniela. We're not trained, for example, in how to do neuroimaging. Sorry to come back to that again, but it's just what I know. And so it's very difficult to apply new methods in a kind of rigorous and robust way. So I don't know, in some ways, I feel we are a little bit stuck in our ways. And I think there are some methods where when I compare how other fields are applying them and the advances there have been, I don't see the same thing in design research. And we seem very attached to those methods, and we don't want to change our ways. But then in other ways, most of us are designers, so we tend to think quite innovatively and thinking about novelty, and I think we like trying different ways of doing things. So I don't know, I'm kind of sitting on the fence in answering your question, I guess, but I can see it from both perspectives.
Yeah, it's a tricky question.
Yeah.
I guess, Ross, we've got about 10 minutes left. Just as we're coming into the last bit, as well as points to make about this afternoon's presentation, if you have any suggestions for other topics that we could include in this series that we're hoping to develop over the next few weeks, please either post them to the chat part of the space or raise them with us. That would be helpful. I see, is it Minnie, is it from Imperial College, has got a hand up?
Yes, it's me again.
Yes, hello.
Yeah, I wanted to just go back to 2 points when you mentioned that our findings cannot be generalized. And I think that goes back to the point that is in the slide. It's about general methodological issues such as sampling and study design. So for example, our samples are way too small to make it generalizable, and the study design itself, I find that we don't follow, and it's quite hard actually, and that's why it's a problem to follow clinical tests. So for example, to have an actual control group with the methodology we're testing and the one without, and then actually measure it so that it's credible, because they tend to be, as we mentioned before, protocol studies, but it's quite descriptive, so it's just one experiment, but there is no group who didn't have that is being tested, so there is no comparison. And also with Creeley, there's this great paper of Vasconcelos and Creeley, but he didn't, I really like and follow the meta-analysis because it's very in-depth and it's quite rare, so I really enjoyed that paper. But on the other hand, they chose, I think, 22 papers, and I really try to find the explanation, how did they chose this 22 papers, and there is nowhere description or definition based on what. So for example, in the medical research, everyone would attack me, for example, and say, did you follow PRISMA systematic methodology? How did you find, what are the criteria for these 22 pages? And actually in this one, although the paper itself is great in terms of the meta-analysis, but the methodology itself, or at least the description of the methodology, does not include how the papers has been chosen.
I think this is a really good point, actually, because I cheat a little in this context, because I actually examined Vasconcelos' PhD. So I do know that there were criteria for that set of paper. But part of the discussion in that defense was why weren't those reported in the paper itself? And then we discussed what the criteria were and how they could work. And I think it reveals one of the sort of falsehoods about like methodological standards is that in general, they actually help communication, because had they been able like to systematically report it following the PRISMA standard, it would be a much more accessible paper and much more credible outside of our community to people who are more familiar with stuff like PRISMA. Yes, and they're simply missing out because they weren't aware at the time of writing of PRISMA, because we don't really have a tradition of doing systematic literature reviews in design research. And it's similar for case study methodology. You know, if you follow the standard procedure and are able to report the basic steps, it makes the paper just so much more accessible to other researchers and increases that credibility.
Yes, I agree. So for example, people from psychology could reach out to the paper and then they'll be, okay, I trust them because they presented the PRISMA, whatever criteria they use, and they can keep on reading. And actually it's also for the society itself, for us, for example, PhD students, if we don't have that kind of depicted to us, presented to us, then we don't know how should we do our own PhDs. Should we just choose this random 22 papers as well, or have some criteria to follow?
I think a lot of design researchers do a lot of learning on the job, and because there's so great diversity of methods, it's hard to really master the one that you're working with in time in a good way in our community, just because most of the really standard methodological texts are outside of our community in the specific place where that method originated from, can make it very difficult.
But we can refer to that. So for example, as I said, that in management, they tend to go back to anthropology, and they are citing anthropologists. So business school would cite Malinowski, this Polish anthropologist, and I don't see a reason why we couldn't be able to also go back and cite PRISMA, for example.
I mean, I think that tradition can come in our field. I think it's just if you look at the papers in the field already and that's your benchmark, then you wouldn't naturally think to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I did a systematic review of protocol studies, and we did use the PRISMA process to structure our methodology. And the only reason that we did that was because we were working with a psychologist who told us about it. And I wouldn't have known it existed if I hadn't been working with them. But an interesting thing as well is that I think like it was really hard to do a systematic review of the design literature because of the way that the variability in the way that we report our findings and things as well. So actually, I think if more people were aware of standards for doing things like systematic reviews and meta-analysis, it kind of has an effect on the way we report things, because we're thinking, you know, at some point later down the line, this might be included in some kind of meta-analysis or systematic review. So things like titles and abstracts and the way that papers are structured, it was a complete nightmare to apply it. But now that I've done it and I know about the PRISMA guidelines and I know what that's all about, I'm very conscious of that when I write my own papers.
Yeah, I think the content of a lot of design research papers is actually very strong. It's just really inaccessible. I mean, that's unfortunately why I ended up reading so much when I did this review of design studies, because in order to actually find the information that you want about what is the contribution to knowledge, I think 80% of the papers you have to read most of the paper to get it out. And that's a big pain.
Yeah, exactly.
If you want to read a lot.
That's exactly the point.
That's what I found years ago when I did a review of the papers that have been presented at ICED 09 at the ICED 11 conference, and about over half of them you couldn't really tell what the methodological position was or the methods used. You had to read the whole paper, and even then it was difficult to interpret. I'm seeing some interesting comments and suggestions for future discussion. Thank you very much for those who have made them. And if anyone else would like to make comments, we have about 3 minutes left, don't we, Ross? I think.
Yep, that's correct.
That's correct.
If we want to sort of wrap up the conversation and let everyone know about that you can head over to the website to get more information about the Design Society as well.
I think I would also say, I can't really speak for Laura, but if anyone has a burning passion for these kind of topics and discussions, please drop me an email, because for sure I will continue to work in this area and to work on this challenge in design research. So it's always good to know who else has a passion for this.
Yeah, I would absolutely second that for sure. Please feel free to get in touch. I'd be really happy to hear from you. And it's been really fun to do this. So hopefully we can have lots more discussions like this.
And if you want to do that, Laura and Phil, you just have to Google their names and it goes straight to their details on the web. www.designsociety.org is the Society's webpage. Lots of information about what's going on. Thank you very much indeed to Laura and Phil for leading today's discussion, which I found very interesting. I hope you have as well, those who are in the chat room. We hope we'll see you in a couple of weeks' time on a new topic. If you have any thoughts on that, please email me, email the Design Society's admin, and we will do our best to incorporate that into future discussions. Thank you everyone for attending, and wish you all a very good weekend. I hope you all keep safe and well, and look forward to seeing you again in a couple of weeks' time. Bye for now.
Thanks very much.
Thanks.
Bye.